I'm sure they would never trade away for themselves. They have done the opposite. So I sincerely appeal to the members opposite and to the crossbench to support families and not support this bill.
Mr Deputy President.
Dr. John Kaye, I'm going to do that.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I rise briefly to address the Retail Trading Amendment Bill 2015, and I associate myself with the remarks of Mr David Shoebridge in his forensic analysis of the bill and his deconstruction of the mean-spirited and nasty provisions within this bill. I also associate myself with the remarks of the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Adam Searle, and in particular with the impassioned remarks of the Honourable Greg Donnelly and his analysis of the bill. And I acknowledge in this chamber that we have been well served by a number of members who have worked as union officials and who have brought that experience into this chamber and have enriched, in some cases, in most cases, in many cases, have enriched the deliberations of this chamber by their view of the economy as seen through the eyes of employed people. An important view and a valid view, and a view that is desperately needed to be brought to bear on this particular piece of legislation. I also thank the SDA and in particular Mr Bernie Smith for the information and advice that he's provided on this bill, and also the Finance Sector Union and Julia Agrisano and the work that she's done on this bill. But more importantly than those individuals is their members and the solidarity of their members in sticking with each other and sticking with the concept that life is more than just work. Work is a critical enabling component of life, but there is more to it. There is balance. And I note the silent interjection of the Honourable Bronnie Taylor that I'm doing this speech at 25 past 9, but I genuinely elect to do so. In fact, I fought hard for the right to do this, the opportunity to do this.
Well, I think we all did, John.
I think everybody in this chamber did, one way or another. But that should never reflect. That should never reflect on the rights of individuals to spend time with their family, time with their community, time with their loved ones, or indeed time on their own. But time away from work, time to reflect on their lives, time to reflect on where they've been, where they're going, time to reflect on their humanness, time to reflect on other people. What this bill seeks to do is reduce from the paltry 4.5 days a year of guaranteed public holidays, guaranteed restrictions on trading in the New South Wales economy, taking it back to 3.5 days a year. And let me say, Mr Deputy President, this is not just about bank employees and retail workers. This is about every employed person across New South Wales and their right to have time with their families, time with their communities, time with themselves, time with their friends. The government argues that this legislation will produce economic benefits, it will create consistency across the state, and it will create more choice for workers. Let's be absolutely clear. Each one of those assertions by the government is utter, complete and profound nonsense. It will not have economic benefits, and I'll turn to that in a minute. And in as much as it did have economic benefits, those would have to be measured against the intangible benefits of the human values of time away from work, the human values of interaction. And if there is a fistful of dollars in this for some people, that fistful of dollars is coming out of the hearts of the retail workers and the bank employees who will be losing out on that precious time, who will be losing 22% of that precious time that they can spend, guaranteed spend, with their family and their friends and their community. The government says, and I heard the previous speaker talking about the need for consistency. Hey, I'm totally into consistency, but let's make it consistent at the best possible outcome, not consistent at the worst possible outcome. This is a race to the bottom. This is a levering down of conditions for working people in Australia. We say, well, some workers have to work on Boxing Day, therefore all workers should be exposed to working on Boxing Day. And Make no mistake, Mr Deputy President, if this happens to bank employees, it will happen to everybody across the entire economy. They say this is about choice for workers. Look, you know, it's all very well for us here in our jobs with our 8-year contracts. Some of us get our 8-year contracts renewed to 16 or longer. It's all well for us here with our fancy salaries and our staff to talk about, well, of course they'll have the right to negotiate. Of course they'll have the right to say no. Of course this will be entirely about workers not being intimidated to making choices, and we've got all sorts of somewhat useless provisions, and I understand the Reverend Nile wants to insert more provisions. You can insert every legislative provision you like, but where the rubber hits the road in industrial negotiations, where the rubber hits the road, where there is one worker being told, we want you to work on Boxing Day, and the unsaid words are, and if you don't turn up for work on Boxing Day, don't bother coming back on the next Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday for a middle of the day shift, because you'll never get one again. It's not said. Nobody ever says it. Sorry?
Oh, it's said often.
Well, maybe it's said. Well, there you go. It is said. I'm stand corrected. Maybe it is said, and maybe it's illegal in this. Maybe it's made illegal in this bill. But, Mr Deputy President, that's irrelevant, because in practice, in reality, what will happen to the hundreds of thousands of employees, and by implication to the million-plus people that Mr Donnelly identified, what will happen to them is that they will be intimidated. And you can create all the Fair Work Australia provisions, you can create all of the industrial provisions in New South Wales, and we can argue which one's better. Oh, no doubt we will. And I'm not opposed to that, but that will not work. In the end, where the employer has the capacity to set the shifting arrangements off into the future, there will be pressure on those workers. There is no free choice for those workers. Mr Deputy President, what this legislation does is it takes shop and bank employees and it says they have to work on Boxing Day. Let's make no mistake about it. Where the employer wants them to, they will work on Boxing Day. It says that not only that, but in the case of the shop employees, the retail employees, many of them will have to work on Christmas Day. And let's be absolutely clear here. Let's be absolutely clear. This is an attack on Christmas Day. If those shops are open on Boxing Day, there will be people unpacking, there will be people receiving, delivering, receiving, unpacking, preparing and shelving on Christmas Day. You cannot vote for this legislation and be pro-Christmas. You cannot vote for this legislation and not expect people to have to work on Christmas Day, because we can't have a situation where we throw the doors open at David Jones on Boxing Day or any other store on Boxing Day and there's nothing on the shelves. The stores have to be prepared. This is a bill about working on Christmas Day. This is a bill about allowing employees in the retail sector to be forced into work on Christmas Day. And anybody who votes for this bill and pretends to themselves or to anybody else that is not so is having themselves on and having their voters on. And it also removes the bank holiday in August and removes the protections on other public holidays for bank workers. It is an attack on a largely casual, largely female, largely low-paid workforce, in opening them up to the same sort of intimidation that I've spoken about with shop employees. It takes 4.5 days a year down to 3.5 days a year, or really in some cases 2.5 days a year, or really if we go down this path, if we don't draw the line on protecting Boxing Day, it means nothing is sacred. It means there will be no days, and it will not just be bank employees and retail employees, it will be everybody across the economy will be facing a flat, no break, no time with family, no opportunity to reflect, no opportunity with community working future. The Honourable Greg Pearce made an interesting contribution, and I think it's worthwhile having a look at that because it really exposes what I think is the greatest single weakness in this legislation. He said, look, actually I'm pro-union. Well, I find that really interesting, and those of us who are here... 2011? Those of us here in... as the Honourable Sophie Costa says, those of us who were here,
With friends like him.
yeah, and as the Honourable Daniel Mookie says, with friends like him, that does. Sorry. Well, I think it was 4 days. I felt like I was talking for 4 days. But the point is, what he says is, look, and like this is the playbook. This is the playbook of conservative economics in the 21st century. We face tough times. We face grim times. We have to do something about it. We have to solve the grim times that we face. He says that we need to create better opportunities. He didn't say opportunities for what, mind you. He said we've got to create better opportunities. We have to be flexible. That word flexible, you know, I'm not very good at yoga, but all I know about yoga is it hurts like hell for people like me, and I think that's probably true of flexibility. Flexibility is in so many cases used by employers to extort from their employees more hours of work. And then he says we've got to make, and then he gives the game away. This is where his argument and the government's argument falls over and dies. He says we've got to make a bigger pie. We've got to create more wealth to redistribute, or to distribute. I don't think he believes in redistribute. We've got to create more wealth. I think he believes in trickle-down. We've got to create more wealth so there's more work for everybody. Terrific stuff. It's a nice idea. And what he says is more trading hours will mean more stuff is purchased, and if more stuff is purchased, there's more economic activity, and there's more economic activity, there's more jobs. Madam Deputy President, you'd be aware I'm an engineer, and as such, I constantly make fun of physicists. And there's a great physicist joke, which I think has been repeated on Big Bang Theory in a slightly changed version, where we make fun of physicists who say they've got the solution to create more milk from a cow, to get more milk from a cow. However, it only works for the perfectly spherical cow living in a vacuum. Well, the Honourable Greg Pearce has created the economic equivalent of the perfectly spherical cow working in a vacuum. Indeed, if we had the perfectly spherical workers, if we had the perfectly spherical employers and the perfectly spherical employees, he might well be right. But bad news, the Honourable Greg Pearce, bad news for you. Nobody is perfectly spherical and none of us live in a vacuum. The reality, the harsh reality, is that employers have a budget line. They have a wages budget line. They have a certain amount of money they're going to spend on wages. And whether they spend that money on the 26th of January or on the 27th of January doesn't make any difference. They're only going to spend in that budget period that amount of money. You don't create more jobs by being open, more job hours by being open on the 27th of January. You just reallocate jobs from the 28th, the 29th, the 30th, whenever you reallocate it back to the 26th. The reality is Boxing Day, being open on Boxing Day, will not create more jobs because there is no more money to pay those workers. There is not going to be a sudden handing over of wealth from the employers to the employees because they're open on Boxing Day. And then the idea that more stuff will be purchased. Well, the reality is, I don't know about you, Madam Deputy President, but my household operates to a budget. We don't always live up to it, but we try and work to something like a budget. Because we shop on the 26th and we buy a new barbecue on the 26th, that means we're not going to buy another one on the 27th. In fact, we would buy it on the 27th if it weren't open on the 26th. You don't create more consumption by being open for longer hours. The Honourable Greg Pearce's argument, the government's argument, falls over at that point. Having shops open for longer, having retail outlets open for longer does not create more jobs, does not create more consumption, does not create more economic activity, does not grow the pie, does not resolve the financial and economic challenges that this state and this nation faces. You can't create more wealth by having shops open longer. It won't work. You can try it, it won't work. We know it won't work because it's exactly what Jeff Kennett and then Ted Baillieu did in Victoria. And in fact, Victoria, as the McKell Institute in their May 2012 report points out, Victoria provides us with an opportunity, I would say a perfect but highly unfortunate opportunity, to measure the impact of changes to trading restrictions on Easter Sunday. And the reality in Victoria was that Kennett liberalised trading hours, Labor got in, they regulated them again. Baillieu and the Liberals got in, and they deregulated, and then Labor got in and they re-regulated. So we have a perfect little laboratory, a non-spherical laboratory, not operating in a vacuum in Victoria. And what was the conclusions from Victoria? The data, I quote, what was observed, however, was that there was no significant ongoing benefit from deregulation in Victoria. Any changes arising from regulatory shifts are completely lost within the broader year-to-year volatility. The data goes on to say the data simply refutes the theory that an extension of trading days will lead to a sustained increase in turnover. It is evident from these graphs that retail trading is much more affected by other external factors, such as interest rate changes or consumer confidence levels, than it is by changes to the number of trading days. Madam Deputy President, we're wasting our time. We are comprehensively wasting our time, but worse than that, we are inflicting pain on working people across New South Wales to achieve no economic outcome. If this government, which talks about getting New South Wales moving, making New South Wales #1, whatever the slogan du jour is coming from the lips of the government today, whatever it is challenged by their economic illiteracy, their profound economic stupidity, by the cargo cult mentality. The cargo cult mentality of this government, saying that by opening up more, by having retails and banks open more for longer hours, will actually create more economic activity. What's really going on here, Madam Deputy President, is that the playbook, Professor Ian Harper's competition policy review, the neoliberal Bible of Australia, said they should do this. In fact, it says, with no reason, a series of really dysfunctional and irrelevant examples and no economic argument, no rationality behind what they're saying. They say, for example, the growing use of internet for retail purchases is undermining the original intent of restrictions on retail trading hours. I've parsed that sentence. I've tried to translate it into French to see if I can make more sense of it. It makes no sense because there is a threat to bricks and mortar retailing from online. But you don't confront that threat by being open more hours. There's no evidence presented that will help confront that threat. They go on to say, in any event, as bricks and mortar stores opt for an online presence to counter this disadvantage, the notion of restricted trading hours becomes less meaningful. Again, I can't understand that sentence. It makes no sense. When you look at it in the cold, hard light of day, it is a nonsensical assertion that doesn't work. So they go on to say, the panel, that's the Harper Review, believes that deregulation of retail trading hours is overdue and that remaining restrictions should be removed as soon as possible. So there it is. The playbook, the real agenda here is to get rid of the whole lot of them. And anybody who votes for this legislation is moving us down the path of losing Anzac Day morning, Easter Sunday and Christmas Day. The Harper Review let the cat out of the bag. In fact, you guys should talk to Ian Harper. You should tell him, be more subtle about how you do this. We're doing this one step at a time. Sorry? Harper? Yes, well, I pass no judgment on him, but he is the oracle of neoliberalism. He's the guy who's driving the agenda, and he says the extent that jurisdictions choose to retain restrictions, these should be strictly limited to Christmas Day, Good Friday and the morning of Anzac Day. And what he's basically saying is, well, if you can't get them this time, we'll come back and get them next time round. Madam Deputy President, I want to make one last set of remarks about this legislation, and it reminds me of one critical feature of our society. And that is, if this legislation is to have any value whatsoever, it reminds us how important organised labour is to our society. It reminds us once again, at a time when organised labour is under attack from the coalition government in Canberra, and I must say from this government here in New South Wales, and at a time when there have been a number of officials in organised labour who have done terrible things and who have sold out their members, at that time, this legislation reminds us how important a good union is to protecting the workforce. A workforce without a union, imagine where we would be without the intervention of the SDA and the FSU. Imagine where we would be now in this debate, where we would be in terms of hours of work without the trade union movement of New South Wales and Australia. I'm a member. I've been a member all my life. I recognise it is not perfect because it's made up of human beings, some of whom are fallible, some of whom are more fallible than others. But I am reminded by this legislation that without organised labour, we hand over all of the power to employers, and we know what they would do. They would destroy our family life. They would destroy our community life. They would destroy us. I condemn this legislation. I urge all members to vote against it.